Hey guys, tonight we're exploring the psychology of people who are always calm, not through effort or technique, but through the way their minds and bodies are fundamentally wired. What makes someone naturally composed? How do their brains process threat differently? Why does their nervous system default to peace? Before we begin, I'm curious to know where you are tuning in from and what time is it where you are. Drop it in the comments. Let's start. Emotional baseline and set point theory. Some people maintain a steady emotional state regardless of external circumstances. This consistency originates in their emotional baseline, a default setting the nervous system returns to after disruption. The baseline functions like a thermostat, pulling emotional states back toward a predetermined level. For chronically calm individuals, this set point sits in the lower range of physiological and psychological arousal. The set point develops through genetic predisposition and early environmental conditioning. Certain gene variants affect neurotransmitter systems that regulate mood stability. Dopamine and serotonin receptor densities determine how strongly environmental triggers affect emotional states. When these systems favor low reactivity, the person naturally gravitates toward calm as their resting configuration. This baseline manifests as a narrow emotional range, while others experience wide swings between distress and excitement. Calm individuals occupy a compressed band of feeling. They report emotions as present but muted. A frustrating situation produces mild irritation rather than anger. Good news generates satisfaction rather than elation. The emotional signal remains legible but never reaches high amplitude. The set point resists temporary perturbation. After a stressful event elevates arousal, the system actively works to restore equilibrium. Heart rate drops back to resting levels faster. Cortisol clears from the bloodstream more efficiently. Cognitive processes shift away from threat monitoring toward neutral tasks. This recovery happens automatically, without conscious intervention. Over time, the nervous system treats calmness as its target state. Any deviation registers as an error requiring correction. The body interprets elevated arousal as something to fix rather than something to sustain. This creates a feedback loop where calmness reinforces itself. Each return to baseline strengthens the pattern, making future deviations less likely and shorter in duration. The consequence is predictable emotional weather. Calm people know they will return to their baseline regardless of circumstances. This knowledge reduces anticipatory anxiety about future stressors. They don't fear emotional spirals because their history shows consistent recovery. The set point becomes a psychological anchor, providing stability even when external conditions shift rapidly. This stability depends on the autonomic nervous system's configuration, which operates beneath conscious awareness to maintain physiological calm. Quick pause here before we proceed further. If this type of valuable content is your thing, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps. Back to the topic now. Autonomic nervous system dominance. The autonomic nervous system has two primary branches, sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic system activates arousal, preparing the body for action. The parasympathetic system promotes rest and recovery. In chronically calm individuals, the parasympathetic branch shows dominant baseline activity. This dominance appears in measurable physiological markers. Resting heart rate sits lower than population averages. Heart rate variability, the fluctuation between beats, registers higher. High variability indicates flexible nervous system regulation and strong parasympathetic tone. Respiratory rate slows naturally, with longer exhalation phases that stimulate vagal nerve activity. The vagus nerve serves as the parasympathetic system's primary pathway. It connects the brainstem to major organs, including the heart, lungs, and digestive tract. High vagal tone correlates with emotional regulation capacity. When vagal activity dominates, the body maintains a rest and digest state as its default. Stress responses activate more slowly and deactivate more quickly. Calm individuals show this pattern across contexts. In neutral situations, their bodies remain in low-gear operation. Digestion proceeds efficiently. Muscles maintain minimal tension. Pupils stay moderately constricted. The body allocates resources toward maintenance and repair rather than emergency mobilization. When stressors appear, the sympathetic system activates, but doesn't override parasympathetic tone completely. The arousal response stays proportional to the actual threat level. A work deadline triggers mild alertness rather than panic. A near miss while driving produces brief vigilance that fades within minutes. The parasympathetic brake engages quickly, preventing sympathetic escalation. This pattern develops partly through conditioning. Repeated experiences of safe threat resolution teach the nervous system that high arousal isn't necessary. If most challenges get handled adequately with moderate activation, the system learns to default to that level. The body stops preparing for catastrophe because catastrophe rarely occurs. The physiological consequences extend beyond emotional experience. Lower chronic sympathetic activation reduces wear on cardiovascular systems. Blood pressure remains stable. Inflammatory markers stay lower. The immune system functions more efficiently without constant stress hormone interference. Calmness becomes both a psychological state and a physiological protection mechanism. This autonomic configuration shapes how incoming information gets evaluated for significance before it ever reaches conscious awareness. Appraisal patterns and threat assessment. Before an event triggers an emotional response, the brain assesses whether it qualifies as threatening. This appraisal process happens rapidly, often before conscious thought. Calm individuals apply stricter criteria for what counts as a genuine threat. The appraisal system compares incoming information against stored threat templates. These templates develop through experience and determine what activates the alarm response. For calm people, fewer situations match their threat templates. A critical email doesn't pattern match with danger. A crowded space doesn't trigger vulnerability signals. The filtering system screens out most stimuli as non-threatening by default. This filtering depends on the amygdala's sensitivity threshold. The amygdala detects potential threats and initiates defensive responses. In calm individuals, this structure shows lower baseline reactivity. It requires stronger or more unambiguous threat signals before activating. Ambiguous situations that might alarm others don't cross their activation threshold. The prefrontal cortex contributes to this appraisal by adding contextual analysis. It evaluates whether a situation genuinely requires immediate action or whether it can be addressed later. Calm people's prefrontal regions engage early in the appraisal process, adding rational assessment before emotional reactions fully develop. This cognitive input reframes potential stressors as manageable problems rather than emergencies. The result is a narrow threat category. Only immediate physical danger, severe loss, or truly novel situations bypass the filtering system. Everything else gets classified as neutral or mildly noteworthy. This classification determines the emotional and physiological response that follows. When most events get labeled as non-threatening, most events produce minimal emotional disturbance. This appraisal pattern shows in real-time behavior. Calm people don't startle easily. Unexpected sounds or movements produce orienting responses rather than alarm. They pause to assess situations rather than reacting immediately. Their threshold for interruption sits high, requiring significant disruption before attention shifts away from current tasks. The appraisal system also evaluates duration and intensity. Calm individuals recognize that most stressors are temporary and moderate. A difficult conversation will end within an hour. A project setback delays progress by days, not years. This temporal perspective prevents catastrophizing. The brain classifies limited duration problems as tolerable rather than overwhelming. Over time, this strict threat filtering creates a self-fulfilling pattern. Because few situations trigger strong responses, fewer situations get encoded as dangerous in memory. The threat template library stays small and specific. Each neutral outcome reinforces the appraisal bias toward calmness. The system becomes increasingly selective about what qualifies for emotional activation. This cognitive appraisal works in concert with how the body's internal signals get interpreted and whether they amplify or dampen emotional reactions. Interoceptive awareness and bodily feedback loops. Interoception refers to the perception of internal bodily states. This includes heart rate, breathing, muscle tension, and digestive sensations. Calm individuals show a specific pattern in how they detect and interpret these signals. Their interoceptive awareness tends toward accuracy without amplification. They can identify when heart rate increases or breathing shallows, but they don't interpret these changes as inherently problematic. A faster heartbeat doesn't automatically signal danger. Slight muscle tension doesn't predict catastrophe. The sensations register as neutral data rather than alarm signals. This interpretation breaks the typical anxiety feedback loop. In anxiety-prone individuals, noticing physiological arousal triggers more arousal. The racing heart becomes evidence of threat, which makes the heart race faster. Calm people don't create this amplification cycle. They notice the sensation, classify it as transient physical activity, and attention moves elsewhere. Some calm individuals show lower interoceptive sensitivity overall. They simply don't notice subtle bodily changes as readily. Without strong internal signals competing for attention, external demands get processed without interference from physical sensations. The body operates in the background rather than demanding conscious monitoring. This pattern affects emotional experience directly. Emotional states depend partly on physiological feedback. The brain interprets bodily arousal and assigns emotional meaning. When bodily signals stay quiet or get interpreted neutrally, emotional intensity remains constrained. The physical foundation for strong emotions never fully develops. Breathing patterns particularly influence this system. Calm individuals typically breathe more slowly and deeply without conscious effort. This respiratory pattern stimulates parasympathetic activity through vagal nerve activation. The breathing itself generates physiological calm, which feeds back as neutral interoceptive signals. The loop reinforces itself continuously. Muscle tension follows similar dynamics. Lower baseline tension means fewer tension-related interoceptive signals. Without the physical sensation of bracing or guarding, the brain receives less input, suggesting vigilance is necessary. The absence of tension signals becomes evidence that calmness is appropriate. This interoceptive style also affects how external stressors get experienced. When a challenging situation occurs, calm people notice their body's response but don't treat it as confirmatory evidence of danger. The slight stomach tightness before a presentation gets recognized as a physical reaction, not as proof the presentation will go badly. The sensation and its meaning stay separated. The long-term consequence is reduced sensitization to bodily arousal. Because arousal signals don't get treated as threatening, they don't become conditioned fear cues. The body can activate moderately without triggering psychological alarm. This allows appropriate physical responses to demands without spiraling into emotional distress. The ability to manage these internal signals depends significantly on higher-order brain structures that actively regulate emotional responses before they fully develop. Prefrontal cortex regulation capacity. The prefrontal cortex sits at the front of the brain and handles executive functions, including emotion regulation. In calm individuals, this region shows enhanced connectivity with emotional centers and demonstrates efficient suppression of reactive impulses. This regulation happens through active inhibition. When the amygdala signals potential threat, the prefrontal cortex evaluates whether a full emotional response is warranted. If the assessment determines the threat is manageable or absent, inhibitory signals suppress the amygdala's activation. The emotional response gets dampened before reaching peak intensity. This process requires minimal conscious effort in chronically calm people. The inhibition happens automatically through well-established neural pathways. Years of successful regulation strengthen these connections, making suppression the default response rather than an effortful choice. The prefrontal cortex intervenes early and effectively without deliberate initiation. The regulation extends beyond threat responses to general arousal management. When excitement or anticipation begins building, the same inhibitory systems can modulate those states. This prevents emotional escalation in positive directions as well. The result is emotional life that stays within a moderate range regardless of valence. Cognitive reappraisal forms another regulatory mechanism. The prefrontal cortex reframes situations to alter their emotional impact. A setback becomes a learning opportunity. A conflict becomes a negotiation problem. These reframings happen rapidly and feel natural rather than forced. The new interpretation replaces the initial emotional reading before the emotion fully develops. Working memory capacity supports this regulation. The prefrontal cortex holds multiple perspectives simultaneously, comparing emotional reactions against rational assessments. Higher working memory capacity allows more complex reappraisals and more factors to be considered before responding. Calm individuals can maintain cognitive complexity even when emotionally challenged. This regulatory capacity shows clear individual differences. Brain imaging studies reveal variation in prefrontal cortex size, activation patterns, and connectivity strength. Those with robust prefrontal regulation show less amygdala reactivity across diverse stressors. The structural differences predict emotional stability across situations. The regulation isn't unlimited. Extreme stressors, sleep deprivation, or sustained demands can deplete regulatory capacity temporarily. When prefrontal resources run low, emotional reactivity increases. However, calm individuals typically maintain larger regulatory reserves and recover capacity faster through rest. The behavioral consequence is response flexibility. Rather than reacting automatically to emotional impulses, calm people can pause and choose responses. This delay allows regulatory systems to engage fully. The space between stimulus and response becomes consistent rather than variable, creating predictable behavioral patterns. This neurological efficiency builds on learning history, where calmness repeatedly proved more useful than agitation in achieving desired outcomes. Learned helpfulness of low arousal. Behavioral patterns persist when they produce favorable outcomes. Calm responses get reinforced when they lead to better results than agitated ones. This conditioning accumulates across thousands of interactions, building a learned association between low arousal and effectiveness. Early experiences establish this pattern. A child who remains calm during a problem receives better assistance from adults. Their clear communication makes the issue easier to address. A child who panics receives frantic responses that may escalate the situation. The calm child learns that composure produces efficient problem resolution. The pattern gets encoded through repetition. Similar reinforcement occurs in peer interactions. Calm children navigate social conflicts more successfully. They negotiate rather than fight. They maintain friendships through disagreements. Agitated responses produce social rejection or prolonged conflicts. The differential outcomes teach the nervous system which state produces better results. Academic and professional environments continue this conditioning. Calm students think more clearly during exams. They access learned information without anxiety interference. Calm employees handle workplace challenges without creating additional drama. Managers and colleagues respond more positively to composed problem-solving than emotional reactions. Each success reinforces calmness as the effective strategy. The reinforcement operates through multiple channels simultaneously. Calm states allow better cognitive function. Decision quality improves. Memory retrieval works more efficiently. Problem-solving becomes more creative. These internal benefits combine with positive external responses from others. The compound reinforcement makes calmness increasingly automatic. Punishment of agitation strengthens the pattern from the opposite direction. High arousal states produce mistakes. Emotional decisions lead to regret. Relationships suffer damage from reactive outbursts. The negative consequences of arousal create avoidance learning. The nervous system learns to prevent high arousal states because they consistently produce poor outcomes. This learning becomes physiologically embedded. The body associates low arousal with safety and reward. Calm states trigger dopamine release through successful outcome anticipation. The neurochemical reward makes calmness inherently pleasant independent of external circumstances. The state becomes self-reinforcing at the biological level. Over decades, The conditioning creates automaticity. Calm becomes the default response without conscious choice. The person no longer decides to stay calm in challenging situations. The conditioned response activates automatically because it has thousands of reinforcement trials behind it. Alternative responses never gain strength because they never produce better outcomes. The learned pattern also includes recovery behaviors. After unavoidable arousal, calm individuals have practiced routines that restore baseline quickly. These might include breathing adjustments, physical movement, or cognitive refocusing. The recovery behaviors get reinforced through successful state restoration. The complete cycle, maintain calm, recover quickly if disrupted, becomes a unified learned response. This conditioning interacts with attentional mechanisms that determine where awareness gets directed during potentially stressful situations. Attentional narrowing versus diffuse awareness. Attention can focus narrowly on specific elements or distribute diffusely across a broader field. These allocation patterns profoundly affect emotional responses. Calm individuals employ diffuse awareness as their default attentional mode. Diffuse awareness processes multiple inputs simultaneously without fixating on any single element. This prevents the amplification that occurs with narrow focus. When attention locks onto a threatening stimulus, that stimulus dominates consciousness and triggers escalating emotional responses. Diffuse awareness prevents this lock-on effect. In practical terms, this means calm people register problems without concentrating on them exclusively. A work error gets noticed as one element among many ongoing tasks. It doesn't capture attention completely. This prevents catastrophizing because attention doesn't magnify the problem through sustained focus. The error remains proportional to its actual significance. Narrow attention functions like a spotlight, illuminating one area while leaving others dark. Whatever sits in that spotlight receives intense processing. Details multiply. Implications expand. The focused element grows in psychological size. This mechanism serves threat detection well, but creates emotional amplification when directed at non-threats. Calm individuals avoid this amplification through attention flexibility. They can narrow focus when tasks require it, but don't maintain narrow focus during emotional challenges. When problems arise, attention broadens to include context, resources, and alternative perspectives. This broader view dilutes the emotional impact of any single element. This attentional style appears in eye movement patterns. Calm people show wider visual scanning rather than fixating on potential threats. Their gaze moves smoothly across environments, gathering information without lingering. Fixation duration stays brief even when processing important stimuli. The eyes move on before emotional activation can build. The diffuse mode also processes positive events without amplification. Good news registers as pleasant but doesn't capture attention completely. This prevents the excitement escalation that can destabilize emotional baselines in the opposite direction. Emotional responses to positive events stay moderate because attention doesn't concentrate on them exclusively. Cognitive load affects this pattern. Higher load naturally broadens attention because multiple demands compete for processing. Calm people often maintain moderate cognitive load intentionally, keeping multiple tasks or considerations active simultaneously. This distributed processing prevents any single concern from dominating awareness. The attentional distribution also affects memory encoding. Narrowly focused attention creates vivid, detailed memories of emotional events. These memories maintain emotional potency long after the event. Diffuse attention during emotional events produces less detailed encoding. The memories remain accessible but carry less emotional charge. This reduces the impact of recalled stressful experiences. Training strengthens this attentional style. Practices that cultivate broad awareness, like certain meditation techniques, enhance diffuse attention capacity. However, most calm individuals develop this naturally through their conditioning history. The attentional pattern emerges as part of the broader calm response system. This attentional flexibility combines with specific ways of perceiving time that reduce feelings of urgency and pressure. Temporal discounting and future orientation. Temporal discounting describes how value changes based on time distance. Immediate rewards and threats feel more significant than distant ones. Calm individuals show flatter discounting curves, meaning they weight present and future more equally. This temporal perception reduces urgency. When future outcomes hold nearly as much weight as immediate ones, present stressors lose some power. A current problem becomes one point on a longer timeline rather than an overwhelming now. The psychological distance created by future orientation dampens immediate emotional intensity. Calm people naturally extend their time horizon when evaluating situations. They automatically consider how current circumstances will appear in days, weeks, or months. This extended perspective reveals that most acute stressors diminish rapidly with time. A conflict that feels intense today will likely resolve or become irrelevant soon. This recognition prevents emotional investment in temporary situations. The extended time frame also appears in goal structures. Calm individuals orient toward distant outcomes rather than immediate gratification. This orientation requires tolerating present discomfort without emotional reaction. The practice of delayed gratification trains emotional regulation. Each instance of choosing future benefit over present comfort strengthens the capacity to remain calm during current challenges. This temporal style affects stress perception directly. Stress involves believing demands exceed capacity within available time. By extending the perceived time available, the demand-capacity ratio improves. A project deadline feels less urgent when viewed across weeks rather than days. The cognitive extension of time literally reduces psychological stress. Future orientation also prevents getting stuck in present emotional states. The person recognizes that current feelings are temporary. This awareness functions as metacognitive regulation. Knowing that distress will pass reduces the distress itself. The temporal perspective becomes a regulation tool. However, this pattern can produce present-moment detachment. Calm people may underrespond to genuinely urgent situations because their temporal discounting treats everything as eventually manageable. They might delay addressing problems that actually require immediate action. The flattened time perception that usually produces calm can occasionally produce inappropriate inaction. The temporal pattern extends to past events as well. Calm individuals show less rumination about past stressors because those events exist at temporal distance. The past gets treated like the distant future, acknowledged but not emotionally potent. This time-symmetrical distance prevents both anticipatory anxiety and retrospective regret from gaining intensity. Biological mechanisms support this temporal perception. Lower urgency correlates with lower cortisol and adrenaline levels. Without stress hormones creating a sense of immediate threat, time feels more expansive. The physiological state and temporal perception reinforce each other in a stabilizing loop. This temporal flexibility depends partly on beliefs about personal influence over outcomes, which shape whether situations feel controllable or overwhelming. Locus of control internalization. Locus of control describes beliefs about whether outcomes stem from personal actions or external forces. Internal locus means attributing results to one's own behavior. This belief system produces significant calming effects. Calm individuals typically hold strong internal locus beliefs. They perceive themselves as capable of influencing outcomes through their choices. This perception reduces helplessness, a major source of emotional distress. When situations feel controllable, they generate less anxiety. The belief in personal agency functions as a psychological buffer. This doesn't mean calm people believe they control everything. They distinguish between controllable and uncontrollable factors accurately. The key difference lies in focus allocation. They direct attention and effort toward controllable elements while accepting uncontrollable ones as given. This selective engagement prevents wasted emotional energy on unchangeable circumstances. The internal locus manifests in specific attributional patterns. Success gets attributed to personal competence and effort. This builds self-efficacy, which further reinforces calm. Failure gets analyzed for correctable actions rather than attributed to permanent personal flaws or malicious external forces. This attribution pattern prevents both shame spirals and paranoid vigilance. Problem-solving behavior reflects this belief structure. Calm people immediately move to action planning when problems arise. They identify what they can do rather than fixating on what went wrong or who's to blame. This action orientation interrupts emotional escalation. Forward movement replaces circular thinking. The locus belief also affects physiological stress responses. Believing in personal control reduces cortisol elevation during challenges. The body doesn't activate full threat responses when the mind perceives the situation as manageable through personal action. The belief literally changes the hormonal environment. This pattern develops through mastery experiences. Repeated instances of successful problem resolution build internal locus beliefs. Each time personal action produces desired outcomes, the belief strengthens. This creates a positive feedback cycle where agency beliefs lead to effective action, which reinforces agency beliefs. Cultural and family environments shape initial locus development. Environments that allow children to make choices and experience natural consequences tend to produce internal locus. Environments that override children's choices or attribute outcomes to luck or fate produce external locus. These early patterns persist into adulthood unless specifically restructured. The belief system affects social interactions as well. Internal locus individuals take responsibility for relationship dynamics. They recognize their role in conflicts and focus on changing their own behavior rather than demanding others change. This reduces interpersonal stress and conflict duration. However, excessive internal locus can produce inappropriate self-blame. Some calm individuals attribute negative outcomes to personal failure even when external factors dominated. They remain calm during the attribution but accumulate self-criticism over time. The locus belief requires accurate calibration to produce optimal effects. This sense of control works together with cognitive patterns that prevent repetitive negative thinking from taking hold. Rumination suppression mechanisms. Rumination involves repetitive focus on problems, causes, and implications without moving toward solutions. This thinking pattern amplifies and extends negative emotional states. Calm individuals employ multiple mechanisms that suppress or prevent rumination. The first mechanism is rapid problem categorization. When a problem arises, calm people quickly classify it as either actionable or not actionable. Actionable problems receive action planning. Non-actionable problems receive acceptance and attention withdrawal. This immediate sorting prevents the indeterminate processing that characterizes rumination. Attentional control supports this suppression. When ruminative thoughts begin, attention shifts toward external tasks or neutral internal content. This shift happens semi-automatically through practiced redirection. The ruminative thought gets interrupted before gaining momentum. Repeated interruption weakens the neural pathways that support rumination. Cognitive absorption in present tasks blocks rumination mechanically. When working memory stays occupied with current activities, no capacity remains for recursive problem analysis. Calm people maintain moderate task engagement throughout the day. This consistent occupation prevents the mental idle state where rumination typically occurs. Some calm individuals show low cognitive reactivity to negative content. When negative thoughts arise, they don't trigger associated negative thoughts. The spreading activation that produces thought chains doesn't occur. A single negative thought appears and dissipates without spawning elaborations. This pattern may stem from weaker associative networks linking negative concepts. Metacognitive awareness also interrupts rumination. Calm people notice when thinking becomes repetitive and unproductive. This recognition allows deliberate pattern disruption. They mentally label the process as rumination and disengage. The meta-level monitoring prevents getting lost in the thought content. Physical activity serves as a rumination suppressant. Movement shifts physiological state and occupies attention. Calm individuals often maintain regular physical routines that structure their day and prevent extended sedentary periods where rumination occurs more easily. The activity doesn't need to be intense. Simple movement breaks suffice. Some individuals show naturally low working memory for negative content. They literally can't hold ruminations in mind for extended periods. The thoughts fade quickly from awareness without active suppression. This memory characteristic functions as passive protection against recursive thinking. Sleep patterns affect rumination susceptibility. Poor sleep increases ruminative thinking. Calm individuals typically maintain regular sleep schedules that preserve cognitive function. The consistent rest prevents the cognitive vulnerability that makes rumination more likely. The suppression mechanisms operate continuously, not just during acute stress. Calm people don't permit rumination to establish itself as a thinking habit. The consistent suppression across contexts keeps the neural pathways weak. This differs from attempting to control rumination only when it becomes problematic, which allows the pattern to strengthen between active suppression attempts. Social rumination also gets suppressed. Calm individuals limit repetitive discussion of problems with others. They may discuss issues to gather perspective or support, but don't engage in circular complaining. This prevents social reinforcement of ruminative patterns and avoids the emotional contagion that occurs in shared rumination. The combined suppression mechanisms create a thinking style characterized by forward movement. Thoughts progress toward conclusions or actions rather than cycling. This directional thinking maintains emotional stability by preventing the emotion-amplifying effects of repetitive negative focus. These cognitive and behavioral patterns interact with how calm individuals evaluate themselves relative to others, which shapes their emotional baseline. Social comparison frequency and direction. People constantly evaluate themselves against others. This comparison process significantly influences emotional states. Calm individuals engage in social comparison less frequently and select comparison targets strategically when they do compare. Reduced comparison frequency prevents the emotional volatility that follows from constant relative evaluation. Each comparison creates potential for negative emotion if the comparison is unfavorable or temporary satisfaction if favorable. By minimizing comparisons, calm people avoid this emotional variability. Their self-assessment relies more on internal standards than external benchmarks. When comparisons do occur, calm individuals select reference groups carefully. They compare against peers with similar circumstances rather than extreme outliers. This selection produces realistic assessments that neither inflate nor deflate self-evaluation. Comparing against achievable standards maintains motivation without generating inadequacy. Downward comparison happens occasionally, but not as a primary strategy. Calm people may notice they're doing better than others in specific domains, but they don't seek out these comparisons for emotional regulation. The comparison happens incidentally rather than deliberately. This prevents the dependency on feeling superior that characterizes some comparison patterns. Upward comparison, when it occurs, gets framed as informational rather than evaluative. Observing someone with greater skill provides learning opportunities rather than evidence of personal deficiency. This reframing prevents the envy and inadequacy that typically follow upward comparison. The focus shifts from relative standing to actionable information. Social media environments intensify comparison opportunities. Calm individuals typically limit exposure to these platforms or use them selectively. They recognize that curated presentations don't reflect actual lives. This recognition diminishes the comparison's emotional impact. The platform content gets mentally categorized as performance rather than reality. Professional environments create unavoidable comparisons through promotions, recognition, and compensation. Calm people respond to these by focusing on their own progress trajectory rather than relative position. Getting passed over for promotion triggers evaluation of personal development needs rather than resentment toward the selected colleague. The self-focus prevents comparative bitterness. The comparison pattern also affects response to others' success. Calm individuals show less zero-sum thinking about achievement. Another person's success doesn't diminish their own possibilities. This abundance mindset prevents the threatened feelings that arise when success is viewed as a limited resource requiring competitive acquisition. Reference group stability contributes to emotional stability. Calm people maintain consistent peer groups rather than constantly shifting social circles. This stability provides continuity in comparison standards. The benchmarks don't fluctuate wildly, preventing emotional whiplash from changing reference points. Some calm individuals show low social comparison orientation as a personality trait. They simply don't engage the cognitive process of evaluation against others automatically. Their attention doesn't highlight relative standing naturally. This trait-level difference provides protection from comparison-based emotional disruption without requiring active management. The reduced comparison extends to temporal self-comparison as well. Calm people don't constantly evaluate current self against past self in ways that generate dissatisfaction. They acknowledge change without harsh judgment about lost capacities or unmet expectations. This temporal acceptance complements the reduced social comparison in maintaining equilibrium. This comparison pattern works alongside preferences for environmental predictability that reduce uncertainty-based arousal. Predictability preference and environmental control. Uncertainty activates stress responses because unpredictable environments historically signaled danger. Calm individuals structure their environments to maximize predictability and minimize unexpected demands. This structuring appears in daily routines. Wake times, meal times, work schedules, and evening activities follow consistent patterns. The regularity creates a predictable rhythm that the nervous system adapts to. The body knows what to expect and when, eliminating the arousal that accompanies uncertainty. Physical environments receive similar structuring. Calm people maintain organized spaces where items have designated locations. This organization eliminates the search behavior and decision fatigue that create microstressors throughout the day. The environment supports activity flow rather than creating friction. Social interactions get structured through boundaries and expectations. Calm individuals communicate their availability, preferences, and limits clearly. This clarity reduces social unpredictability. Others know what to expect, and the calm person knows what interactions will likely occur. The mutual predictability prevents social anxiety. Work patterns emphasize planning and preparation. Tasks get broken into scheduled components. Deadlines receive buffer time. Contingencies get anticipated. This preparation converts potential chaos into managed sequences. Even when problems arise, the structured approach provides frameworks for addressing them. The preference doesn't mean rigidity. Calm people adapt when necessary, but maintain structure as the default. They recognize that predictability conserves regulatory resources. When the environment stays predictable, cognitive capacity remains available for genuine novel challenges rather than routine navigation. This pattern affects information consumption. Calm individuals often limit news intake and avoid information streams that inject unpredictability into awareness. Constant updates about potential threats create the illusion of an unstable world. Selective information consumption maintains a more stable perceived environment. Decision-making benefits from routinization. Repeated decisions get converted into rules or habits. What to eat, what to wear, which route to take. These get standardized when possible. Each routinized decision eliminates choice-related arousal and preserves mental energy. The control extends to commitments. Calm people protect their time and avoid overcommitment. They maintain margins in their schedules. This prevents the unpredictability that comes from having too many obligations competing for limited time. The scheduled breathing room absorbs unexpected demands without creating crisis. However, this preference can limit growth experiences. New opportunities introduce unpredictability. Calm individuals might avoid beneficial changes because those changes disrupt established patterns. The stability that protects calmness can also prevent adaptation to new circumstances that would ultimately benefit them. Social relationships sometimes suffer from excessive predictability preference. Spontaneity adds richness to relationships, but introduces unpredictability. Calm people might resist spontaneous activities, which partners or friends experience as rigidity. The preference that serves individual emotional regulation can create interpersonal friction. Environmental control also includes managing sensory input. Calm individuals often prefer quiet environments with controlled lighting and temperature. They minimize sensory unpredictability along with behavioral unpredictability. The comprehensive environmental management maintains the low arousal state across all input channels. This environmental approach interacts with how emotions themselves get recognized and labeled during internal experience. Alexithymia and emotional granularity. Alexithymia refers to difficulty identifying and describing emotions. Emotional granularity describes the precision with which emotions get differentiated. These dimensions significantly affect emotional experience intensity and duration. Some calm individuals show moderate alexithymia. They experience emotions as vague states rather than distinct feelings. This lack of precision prevents emotions from crystallizing into intense forms. Without clear labeling, the emotional state remains diffuse and less powerful. The absence of detailed emotional awareness functions as a dampening mechanism. This pattern differs from emotional suppression. The person isn't avoiding known emotions. They genuinely don't differentiate emotional states finely. Distress registers as general discomfort rather than specifically as anxiety, frustration, or sadness. This lumping prevents the amplification that comes with precise identification. Low granularity also shortens emotional episodes. Precisely labeled emotions persist longer because the label maintains the experience. When emotions remain unlabeled, they fade faster. The experience passes without getting locked into consciousness through linguistic encoding. The emotional event ends more quickly. Other calm individuals show high emotional granularity, but with a different pattern. They identify emotions precisely but don't respond to the identification with escalation. They notice anxiety as distinct from frustration, but this recognition doesn't amplify either state. The precise awareness serves information purposes without emotional intensification. High granularity in these cases supports regulation. Precise identification enables targeted intervention. Knowing specifically that one feels anxious versus angry allows appropriate response selection. The clarity helps rather than hinders emotional management. The key difference lies in reactivity to emotional labels. Some people experience the label itself as threatening. Recognizing, "I am anxious," triggers more anxiety about being anxious. Calm individuals don't show this secondary response. The label remains descriptive rather than becoming a new source of distress. Language habits reflect these patterns. Low granularity individuals use general terms like fine, okay, or tired when describing their state. High granularity calm people use specific emotion words but deliver them neutrally, without dramatic emphasis. The linguistic style mirrors the internal experience. Social communication patterns adjust accordingly. Low granularity individuals provide less emotional detail in conversations. They report events factually without extensive emotional commentary. This communication style sometimes frustrates others who seek emotional connection, but it accurately represents their internal experience. Alexithymia correlates with lower emotional intensity across positive and negative valence. Without precise recognition, neither joy nor distress reaches peaks. This creates emotional life in a moderate range. The person experiences emotional flatness relative to others, but doesn't typically perceive this as a problem. Therapeutic approaches for emotional issues often target increased granularity. The assumption is that better emotional awareness improves regulation. For some calm individuals, this intervention might actually increase emotional intensity without providing regulation benefits. Their low granularity serves protective functions that improved differentiation would disrupt. Cultural factors influence these patterns. Some cultures emphasize emotional awareness and expression, while others value emotional restraint and privacy. Calm individuals from restraint-oriented cultures may develop low granularity as an adaptive pattern that fits cultural expectations while also serving personal regulation. These emotional awareness patterns develop partly through early relationship experiences that shape fundamental emotional security. Attachment security and relational buffering. Attachment patterns form in early childhood through interactions with caregivers. Secure attachment develops when caregivers respond consistently and appropriately to infant needs. This early experience creates templates for adult emotional regulation and relationship functioning. Securely attached individuals expect others to be available and responsive. This expectation reduces anxiety about abandonment or rejection. Without these social threats activating regularly, baseline emotional arousal stays lower. The fundamental security allows calmness because social survival doesn't feel constantly threatened. The internal working model established through secure attachment includes the belief that distress is manageable and help is available when needed. This belief prevents helplessness and catastrophizing. When problems arise, the securely attached person automatically expects resolution is possible. This expectation maintains calmness during challenges. Secure attachment also produces effective emotion regulation strategies. Securely attached children learn that expressing distress brings comfort. They develop trust in social support as a regulation tool. As adults, they reach out for help appropriately, which prevents isolation-driven emotional spirals. The social connection functions as a regulation resource. Relationship stability follows from secure attachment. These individuals form stable partnerships characterized by trust and effective communication. The relationship itself becomes a buffer against external stressors. Having a secure base to return to after challenges makes those challenges less threatening. The relationship provides consistent emotional refuge. The buffering effect appears physiologically. Securely attached individuals in stable relationships show lower cortisol responses to stress. The mere presence of a trusted partner dampens physiological arousal. This biological regulation happens automatically through the sense of safety the relationship provides. Secure attachment also shapes parenting behavior. Securely attached adults tend to provide responsive caregiving to their children. This transmits secure attachment across generations. The calm emotional regulation passes to children through consistent, attuned parenting responses. The intergenerational stability reinforces the pattern. Not all calm individuals have secure attachment histories. Some develop compensatory mechanisms that produce similar outcomes. They might use cognitive strategies to achieve the security that others gain through relationship expectations. However, secure attachment provides the most efficient path to sustained calmness because it operates automatically without requiring conscious effort. Insecure attachment patterns create ongoing vulnerability. Anxious attachment generates constant worry about relationship stability. Avoidant attachment prevents using relationships for regulation support. Both patterns require more active management to maintain calmness. The regulatory effort expenditure makes sustained calm more difficult. Attachment security affects how stressors get appraised. Secure individuals interpret ambiguous social situations more benignly. They don't assume rejection or hostility as default explanations for others' behavior. This generous interpretation prevents many social stressors from registering as threats. The threat filtering discussed earlier operates more effectively with secure attachment as its foundation. Relationship repair capacity differs between attachment styles. Secure individuals navigate conflicts effectively and repair ruptures quickly. Relationships return to baseline functionality after disagreements. This repair capacity prevents relationship conflicts from becoming chronic stressors. The conflicts remain acute and resolvable rather than accumulating into relationship instability. These psychological and relational patterns operate alongside biological stress response systems that determine how intensely the body reacts to demands. Cortisol response patterns and HPA axis efficiency. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis regulates cortisol release in response to stress. This system shows consistent individual differences in reactivity and recovery. Calm individuals demonstrate specific HPA axis patterns that maintain low arousal. Their cortisol awakening response shows moderate elevation. Upon waking, cortisol rises to prepare the body for daily demands. In calm individuals, this rise reaches adequate but not excessive levels. The system activates proportionally without overshooting. This measured morning response sets the tone for the day's arousal trajectory. Throughout the day, baseline cortisol levels remain in the lower normal range. Without constant stressors triggering release, the hormone stays at maintenance levels. This low baseline means smaller absolute elevations when stressors do occur. The system operates with more headroom before reaching problematic levels. When acute stressors trigger cortisol release, calm individuals show rapid rise, but also rapid decline. The hormone reaches peak levels appropriate to the stressor severity, then clears efficiently. The HPA axis doesn't maintain elevated output after the stressor resolves. This efficient recovery prevents prolonged exposure to stress hormones. The negative feedback loop that terminates cortisol release functions effectively. Cortisol receptors in the hippocampus and hypothalamus detect elevated hormone levels and signal for reduced production. In calm individuals, this feedback mechanism shows high sensitivity. Small elevations trigger shutdown signals, preventing sustained activation. Chronic stress exposure damages this feedback system. Prolonged cortisol exposure reduces receptor sensitivity, requiring higher hormone levels to trigger shutdown. Calm individuals avoid this damage through their overall low stress exposure. The system maintains sensitivity through lack of chronic activation. Cortisol follows a diurnal rhythm, highest in morning and lowest at night. This rhythm remains robust in calm individuals. Clear circadian patterns indicate healthy HPA axis function. Disrupted rhythms appear in chronic stress conditions where the system loses its temporal organization. The preserved rhythm in calm people reflects their low chronic stress burden. Individual variation in cortisol patterns has genetic components. Polymorphisms in genes regulating HPA axis function affect stress hormone responses. Some calm individuals inherit genetic variants associated with lower reactivity. This biological predisposition creates a foundation for behavioral calmness. The cortisol pattern affects multiple bodily systems. Immune function, metabolism, cardiovascular activity, and neuroplasticity all respond to cortisol levels. Lower chronic exposure produces widespread health benefits. The calm individual's HPA axis pattern protects physical health while maintaining psychological equilibrium. However, very low cortisol can indicate problems. Chronically suppressed HPA axis function appears in some trauma conditions. The system becomes hyporesponsive rather than balanced. Calm individuals show normal reactivity with efficient recovery, not suppressed reactivity. The distinction matters for understanding whether the pattern represents health or dysfunction. Cortisol interacts with other stress systems, including sympathetic nervous system activation. Calm individuals show coordination between these systems. Both activate proportionally to demands, and both recover efficiently. The integrated stress response produces appropriate mobilization without excessive or prolonged activation. Lifestyle factors influence HPA axis function. Sleep, exercise, nutrition, and substance use all affect cortisol patterns. Calm individuals typically maintain health behaviors that support optimal HPA axis function. The behavioral patterns and biological patterns reinforce each other in maintaining the stress response profile. This hormonal regulation combines with perceptual processes that determine what information enters conscious awareness in the first place. Perceptual filtering and selective attention. Conscious awareness processes only a fraction of available sensory information. The brain filters input continuously, determining what reaches awareness and what gets screened out. Calm individuals show distinctive filtering patterns that reduce exposure to arousing stimuli. Their perceptual filters prioritize neutral and task-relevant information. Threat-related stimuli don't capture attention automatically the way they do in anxiety-prone individuals. A loud noise gets registered but doesn't hijack processing. Facial expressions displaying anger or fear don't pull focus away from ongoing activities. The filtering system classifies these inputs as non-priority unless directly relevant to current goals. This filtering operates preconsciously through attentional biases. Eye tracking studies reveal that calm people don't fixate on threatening stimuli even when those stimuli appear in their visual field. Their gaze moves past potential threats without pausing. The attention simply doesn't stick to negative content the way it does for others. The filtering extends to internal stimuli as well. Minor physical discomforts, intrusive thoughts, and emotional fluctuations get screened out before reaching full awareness. The person might have a slight headache, but it remains background noise rather than becoming a focal concern. This internal filtering prevents the hypervigilance toward bodily sensations that characterizes anxiety disorders. Selective attention reinforces this pattern through active direction. When multiple stimuli compete for awareness, calm individuals consistently direct attention toward neutral or positive elements. In a crowded environment with both pleasant and unpleasant features, their attention gravitates toward the pleasant. This selection happens rapidly and feels natural rather than effortful. The filtering system also manages information complexity. Overwhelming amounts of input get automatically sorted into relevant and irrelevant categories. Only the relevant subset reaches working memory. This prevents cognitive overload that would trigger stress responses. The filtering maintains manageable information flow regardless of environmental complexity. Habituation contributes to filtering efficiency. Repeated exposure to stimuli reduces their salience. Calm people have typically habituated to a wide range of common stressors. Traffic noise, work pressure, social friction. These no longer trigger alert responses because they've been encountered countless times without actual harm resulting. The habituation creates automatic filtering of previously novel but now familiar stressors. Cultural and environmental factors shape filter development. Growing up in chaotic environments can produce either heightened sensitivity or enhanced filtering capacity. Some individuals develop robust filters as an adaptation to high-stimulus environments. Others become sensitized. The calm pattern reflects successful filter development rather than mere lack of exposure. The perceptual system shows plasticity. Filters can strengthen or weaken based on ongoing experience. Calm individuals maintain their filtering through continued selective exposure. They avoid unnecessary exposure to highly arousing content like violent media or constant crisis news. This protective selection prevents filter erosion. However, aggressive filtering can miss genuinely important signals. Calm people might overlook legitimate warnings because their filters screen out threat information efficiently. A social cue indicating someone's distress might not register. A project risk indicator might get filtered as routine noise. The filtering that usually protects calm can occasionally create blind spots. The filtering system interacts with how events get explained, which determines whether they generate lasting emotional effects. Attribution style and explanatory frameworks. When events occur, the brain automatically generates explanations for why they happened. These causal attributions profoundly influence emotional responses. Calm individuals employ attribution patterns that prevent emotional volatility. For negative events, they favor external, unstable, and specific attributions. A failure gets attributed to situational factors rather than personal inadequacy. The circumstances were unfavorable, not the self fundamentally flawed. This external attribution prevents shame and protects self-worth. The unstable component means attributing the cause to changeable factors. Bad outcomes resulted from temporary conditions rather than permanent realities. The project failed because of current resource constraints, not because success is impossible. This attribution maintains hope and prevents helplessness. The situation can improve because the causal factors aren't fixed. Specific attributions limit the event's implications. The failure applies to this particular situation rather than indicating global incompetence. Doing poorly on one exam doesn't mean academic inability. One relationship ending doesn't prove unlovability. The specific framing contains the negative event rather than allowing it to contaminate other domains. For positive events, the pattern reverses partially. Success gets attributed to a combination of internal effort and favorable circumstances. This balanced attribution builds confidence without creating fragility. Internal attribution for success maintains self-efficacy. Acknowledging circumstantial contribution prevents the brittleness that comes from believing success depends purely on inherent traits. The attribution pattern affects future expectations. When bad outcomes stem from unstable factors, future outcomes remain open. The person doesn't expect continued failure because the causes will change. This optimistic orientation maintains motivation and prevents anticipatory anxiety about future performance. Calm individuals show flexibility in attribution across domains. They don't rigidly apply internal or external attributions regardless of circumstances. When genuinely responsible for negative outcomes, they acknowledge personal causation. This accuracy prevents the defensive distortions that create interpersonal problems. Others trust their self-assessment because it corresponds to reality. The attribution style also applies to others' behavior. When someone behaves negatively, calm people attribute it to situational pressures rather than malicious character. This generous attribution prevents interpersonal conflict escalation. The other person isn't inherently hostile, just responding to difficult circumstances. This interpretation allows relationship preservation through difficulties. Attribution affects the duration of emotional responses. When negative emotions arise from stable, internal, global attributions, they persist. The causal explanation predicts continued negativity. When emotions arise from unstable, external, specific attributions, they dissipate quickly. The cause will change, so the emotion is temporary. Calm people's attribution style naturally produces shorter emotional episodes. Learned helplessness develops when repeated negative events get attributed to stable, internal, global causes. The person concludes that their actions don't matter because they're fundamentally incapable. Calm individuals avoid this pattern through their attribution style. Even repeated setbacks don't produce helplessness because each gets explained as situational and changeable. The explanatory framework also includes beliefs about effort and ability. Calm people tend to emphasize effort over fixed ability. Outcomes result from applied effort rather than innate capacity. This belief maintains control because effort is always available. The person can always try differently or harder. Ability-focused beliefs create fragility because ability feels unchangeable. These attribution patterns operate alongside fundamental approach avoidance motivational systems that shape behavioral responses to situations. Behavioral inhibition system sensitivity. Two fundamental motivational systems govern behavior: the behavioral approach system and the behavioral inhibition system. The approach system drives toward rewards and opportunities. The inhibition system responds to threats and punishment by halting action. Individual differences in these systems' sensitivity predict emotional patterns. Calm individuals typically show low behavioral inhibition system sensitivity. This means weaker automatic responses to potential threats or negative outcomes. Situations that would freeze or halt behavior in others don't trigger the same inhibitory response. The person continues forward-directed action despite risks. This low sensitivity appears in willingness to engage uncertain situations. Where high inhibition individuals pause and withdraw when outcomes are unclear, calm people proceed. The uncertainty doesn't activate strong stop signals. They move through ambiguous situations without the braking effect that creates anxious hesitation. The inhibition system connects to anxiety neurobiology. High system sensitivity correlates with anxiety vulnerability. Low sensitivity provides natural protection against anxiety disorders. The person doesn't generate the physiological and cognitive processes that produce anxious states as readily as others. Approach system sensitivity shows more variation among calm individuals. Some have high approach sensitivity, creating calm enthusiasm. They pursue rewards actively without inhibition-driven hesitation. Others show moderate approach sensitivity, producing calm contentment rather than excitement. The low inhibition appears consistently, but approach system levels vary. The combination of low inhibition and high approach creates calm extroversion. The person engages socially and pursues opportunities without the inhibition that would create social anxiety or risk avoidance. They appear confident and forward-moving. The calmness combines with activity. Low inhibition with moderate approach produces calm introversion. The person doesn't pursue stimulation actively, but also doesn't withdraw from situations. They remain neutral and observant. The lack of inhibition prevents anxiety, while moderate approach prevents restlessness. This combination appears as peaceful disengagement. The inhibition system sensitivity shows stability across lifespan. Early temperament assessments predict adult behavioral patterns. Children identified as low in behavioral inhibition tend to become calm adults. The system sensitivity has strong biological foundations that resist environmental modification. However, extreme low inhibition creates problems. Some risk-taking and caution serve protective functions. Very low inhibition can produce recklessness and failure to recognize genuine danger. Optimal calmness comes from moderately low inhibition, not complete absence of the inhibition system's influence. The system sensitivity affects learning from negative outcomes. High inhibition individuals learn quickly from punishment and threats. They become cautious after bad experiences. Low inhibition individuals require more repetitions to modify behavior based on negative consequences. They don't overlearn from single negative events, which maintains calmness but can delay appropriate behavioral adjustment. Social behavior reflects these patterns clearly. High inhibition produces social withdrawal and vigilance. Low inhibition allows social comfort and behavioral spontaneity. Calm people navigate social situations without the constant inhibitory signals that make others uncomfortable in social settings. The inhibition system interacts with prefrontal regulation. Low automatic inhibition means less regulatory demand. The prefrontal cortex doesn't need to override strong inhibitory signals constantly. This reduces regulatory depletion and preserves resources for genuine challenges. This motivational architecture combines with awareness about emotional experiences themselves, which can either amplify or dampen those experiences. Meta-emotional awareness. Meta-emotion refers to emotions about emotions or thoughts about emotional experiences. This secondary level of processing significantly affects primary emotional intensity and duration. Calm individuals demonstrate specific meta-emotional patterns. They observe emotions without judgment. When sadness arises, they notice it as a present experience without evaluating whether they should feel sad. This neutral observation prevents the secondary distress that comes from rejecting emotional experiences. Fighting emotions amplifies them. Accepting observation allows them to run their course naturally. The meta-emotional stance includes curiosity rather than threat response. An emerging anxious feeling becomes interesting data rather than a problem requiring urgent elimination. This curious stance reduces the anxiety about anxiety that creates escalation. The person watches the emotion without becoming alarmed by its presence. Calm individuals separate emotion from identity. Feeling anger doesn't mean being an angry person. Experiencing fear doesn't indicate weakness. The emotion exists as a temporary state rather than an identity marker. This separation prevents the shame and self-criticism that intensify emotional episodes. The meta-awareness includes temporal perspective. The person recognizes emotions as transient. This recognition appears spontaneously during emotional experiences. This feeling will pass. The thought doesn't require deliberate generation. The temporal awareness exists automatically and functions as a regulation mechanism. Some calm people show low meta-emotional awareness. They don't think about their emotions much at all. Feelings come and go without metacognitive commentary. This absence of meta-emotion prevents amplification through secondary processing. The primary emotion remains simple and brief because no additional processing occurs. High meta-emotional awareness in calm individuals includes accurate prediction of emotional trajectories. They know how long certain feelings typically last for them. They recognize the progression pattern emotions follow. This predictive awareness reduces uncertainty and creates sense of control over emotional experiences. The meta-emotional framework includes causal understanding. The person knows what triggers specific emotions and how those triggers operate. This understanding provides explanatory power that reduces emotions' threatening quality. The emotion makes sense within a comprehensible framework rather than appearing as a mysterious force. Meta-emotional beliefs about functionality matter significantly. Calm people generally view emotions as informational rather than as problems. Emotions signal something about situations or needs. This functional view contrasts with seeing emotions as disruptions to eliminate. The functional framework allows engagement with emotions without resistance. Cultural factors shape meta-emotional patterns heavily. Western psychological frameworks emphasize emotional awareness and processing. Eastern traditions sometimes emphasize acceptance without elaboration. Calm individuals' meta-emotional style reflects their cultural context while serving regulation functions within that context. The meta-emotional stance affects communication about feelings. High meta-awareness calm individuals can describe emotions clearly when relevant. Low meta-awareness calm individuals provide minimal emotional information, which can frustrate relationship partners who value emotional sharing. Neither pattern is inherently superior, but compatibility with others' expectations affects relationship functioning. Therapeutic approaches often target meta-emotional change. Cognitive therapy addresses thoughts about emotions. Mindfulness develops non-judgmental awareness. Acceptance-based therapies modify resistance to emotional experiences. For calm individuals, existing meta-emotional patterns already serve these functions naturally. Intervention might be unnecessary or could disrupt functional patterns. This metacognitive processing operates within broader resource management systems that determine how psychological energy gets distributed across demands. Energy conservation and effort allocation. Psychological functioning requires energy. Attention, emotion regulation, decision-making, and self-control all consume limited cognitive resources. Calm individuals show distinctive patterns in how they conserve and allocate these resources. They avoid unnecessary expenditure. When a situation doesn't require active intervention, they don't invest regulatory effort. This contrasts with constant effortful control that depletes resources. By conserving energy during low-demand periods, they maintain capacity for genuine challenges. The conservation appears in selective engagement. Not every problem receives full attention. Minor issues get acknowledged and then ignored if they don't require immediate action. This triage prevents the resource drain that comes from treating every concern as equally important. Calm people often maintain reserve capacity. They don't operate at maximum cognitive load regularly. This protective margin means unexpected demands can be absorbed without system overload. The reserve functions as a buffer against stress. Others who consistently operate near capacity have no margin when demands increase. Effort allocation follows a priority hierarchy. Essential activities receive necessary resources first. Discretionary activities receive what remains. This disciplined allocation prevents the scattered engagement that exhausts resources without accomplishing priorities. The hierarchical approach ensures important functions maintain adequate support. The pattern includes knowing when to disengage. Continuing effort on unsolvable problems wastes resources. Calm individuals recognize diminishing returns and redirect attention elsewhere. This disengagement capacity prevents the persistence that leads to exhaustion without producing results. Physical energy management supports psychological resource conservation. Adequate sleep, nutrition, and activity maintain the biological substrate for cognitive function. Calm people typically maintain health basics that preserve energy availability. The physical foundation supports psychological efficiency. Automated routines conserve decision-making energy. By standardizing recurring choices, cognitive load decreases. The person doesn't expend resources deciding what to do in familiar situations. The automation frees capacity for novel challenges requiring creative problem-solving. Social energy management also appears. Calm individuals limit interactions when needed to preserve energy. They decline optional social commitments without guilt. This boundary maintenance prevents the depletion that comes from excessive social demands. The selective engagement maintains their capacity for valued relationships. The allocation pattern includes strategic delegation. When others can handle tasks adequately, calm people delegate rather than maintaining personal control. This distributes load and prevents individual overextension. The delegation requires trust but produces significant resource conservation. However, excessive conservation can become avoidance. Some calm individuals underspend resources, missing opportunities for engagement that would enrich life. The protection against depletion becomes a barrier to meaningful activity. Optimal allocation involves appropriate engagement rather than minimal expenditure. Resource depletion produces temporary dysregulation. Even calm individuals show increased reactivity when exhausted. The regulatory systems require energy to function. When depleted, those systems operate less effectively. Calm people typically recognize depletion signs and prioritize recovery before dysregulation becomes severe. The energy management style reflects learned efficiency. Through experience, calm individuals have identified what requires effort and what doesn't. They've learned to distinguish genuine priorities from false urgencies. This discernment allows intelligent resource allocation that maintains functioning without waste. Recovery practices restore depleted resources. Rest, low-demand activities, and pleasurable engagement replenish capacity. Calm people typically include recovery time in their routines rather than waiting for complete exhaustion. The proactive recovery maintains relatively stable energy availability. These resource management patterns interact with how the body responds when unavoidable challenges do arise, which involves specific habits around exposure and habituation. Desensitization through controlled exposure. Repeated exposure to stressors reduces their emotional impact through habituation. The nervous system learns that stimuli previously registered as threatening don't actually produce harm. Calm individuals have accumulated extensive habituation through gradual exposure patterns. This desensitization often occurs naturally rather than through deliberate exposure therapy. The person encounters mildly challenging situations repeatedly across development. Each encounter without catastrophic outcome weakens the threat response. Over time, the accumulated exposures create broad habituation to common stressors. The exposure pattern follows a gradient. Early experiences involve manageable challenge levels that don't overwhelm coping capacity. Success at one level enables progression to slightly more difficult challenges. This graduated exposure builds tolerance systematically. The person never faces demands so extreme they create sensitization rather than habituation. Calm individuals tend not to avoid uncomfortable situations. This non-avoidance is critical for habituation development. Avoidance prevents exposure, which prevents habituation, which maintains the stressor's potency. By engaging rather than withdrawing, calm people allow the habituation process to operate. Each engagement weakens the response incrementally. The habituation extends across stimulus categories. Someone habituated to public speaking also shows reduced anxiety about other performance situations. The generalization occurs because underlying response patterns overlap across situations. Habituation to one category partially transfers to related categories. Physiological markers reflect this desensitization. Heart rate elevation to familiar stressors decreases over exposures. Cortisol responses dampen. Startle reflexes weaken. The body literally stops reacting as intensely to previously arousing stimuli. This physiological habituation supports psychological calmness. Some exposure occurs through observational learning. Watching others handle stressors calmly provides vicarious habituation. The observer's nervous system learns that the situation is manageable without requiring direct personal exposure. This social learning accelerates habituation beyond what personal experience alone would provide. The desensitization creates expanding comfort zones. Activities that initially required courage become routine. What felt intimidating becomes boring through repetition. This comfort expansion allows functioning in increasingly complex environments without emotional disturbance. However, habituation requires repeated exposure without reinforcement of fear. If exposures consistently pair with negative outcomes, sensitization occurs instead. Calm individuals typically have histories where exposure didn't produce feared consequences. The neutral or positive exposure outcomes enabled habituation rather than increased reactivity. Deliberate exposure sometimes backfires if not properly calibrated. Overwhelming exposure can traumatize rather than habituate. Calm people's natural exposure pattern tends to stay within manageable ranges. They stretch slightly beyond comfort zones without leaping into overwhelming territory. This natural calibration protects habituation development. The habituation also applies to positive stimuli. Calm individuals don't maintain intense excitement about repeatedly encountered pleasant experiences. The dampening of positive arousal contributes to overall emotional stability. Both ends of the arousal spectrum undergo habituation. Age affects habituation accumulation. Older calm individuals have more exposure history and thus more extensive habituation. Younger calm people might show the pattern emerging but not yet fully developed. The lifespan trajectory generally involves expanding habituation as exposure diversity increases. This internal habituation process influences how calm people present themselves in social contexts, which creates feedback loops affecting their emotional state. Social signaling and reciprocal calmness. Emotional states communicate through verbal and nonverbal channels. Calm individuals display composure through posture, facial expression, vocal tone, and behavior. This displayed calmness shapes how others respond, creating reciprocal dynamics that reinforce the calm state. The physical presentation of calmness includes relaxed musculature. Facial muscles remain loose rather than tense. Shoulders sit in neutral position rather than elevated. Body movements occur smoothly without jerky tension. These physical markers signal safety to others at a preconscious level. Vocal characteristics convey calmness through multiple features. Speech rate remains moderate rather than rushed. Pitch variation stays controlled without dramatic fluctuations. Volume remains steady. Pauses occur naturally without anxious filling. These vocal qualities produce soothing effects on listeners. The calm display affects others' nervous system states through emotional contagion. Mirror neurons and related mechanisms cause people to internally simulate observed emotional states. When someone observes calmness, their own physiology shifts toward calm. This contagion operates automatically below conscious awareness. The reciprocal effect benefits the calm person directly. When others around them become calmer, the social environment contains fewer stress-inducing signals. The feedback loop reinforces the original calm state. The person's calmness creates a calmer environment, which supports their continued calmness. Social interactions proceed more smoothly when one party maintains composure. The calm person provides stability that helps others regulate their emotions. Conflicts de-escalate more readily. Problems get solved more efficiently. The calm individual becomes a regulating presence in social systems. This role can become burdensome. Others may depend on the calm person to maintain group emotional regulation. The expectation that they will always stay composed creates pressure. If the calm person does become upset, others may react with alarm because the stable anchor has shifted. The role rigidity can feel constraining. The calm display also affects how problems get perceived. When someone describes a serious issue while appearing calm, others may underestimate the problem's severity. The emotional presentation provides context for interpreting the content. This can work against the calm person when they need others to recognize genuine concerns. Strategic calm display serves social goals. Remaining composed during negotiations conveys confidence and control. Maintaining calm in conflicts prevents escalation. The ability to display calm even when experiencing internal arousal provides social advantage. Some calm individuals use this capacity strategically, while others display genuine internal states directly. Cultural norms shape what calm presentation means. In some cultures, emotional restraint signals respect and maturity. In others, emotional expressiveness indicates engagement and authenticity. Calm individuals navigate these norms based on their cultural context. The same presentation receives different social responses across cultures. The calm display can produce social distance. Others may perceive the calm person as cold or disengaged. Emotional expression creates connection for many people. Limited display may prevent relationship intimacy, even when the calm person values connection. The presentation style can inadvertently communicate disinterest. Children of calm parents receive modeling of emotional regulation. They observe composed responses to stress and learn similar patterns. This intergenerational transmission occurs through social learning. The parent's calm display shapes the child's developing emotional regulation capacities. Professional contexts often reward calm presentation. Leaders who remain composed during crises inspire confidence. Professionals who handle pressure calmly appear competent. The social signaling of composure carries career advantages in most fields. This outward composure operates alongside specific thought patterns about alternative possibilities that either generate or prevent emotional arousal. Counterfactual thinking limitations. Counterfactual thinking involves imagining alternative versions of events. These what-if scenarios compare actual outcomes against hypothetical alternatives. This cognitive process significantly affects emotional responses. Calm individuals engage in counterfactual thinking less frequently and less intensely. They don't extensively imagine how situations could have unfolded differently. After an event concludes, they accept the outcome and move forward. The mental replay that generates regret or relief doesn't dominate their thinking. The actual outcome receives focus rather than hypothetical alternatives. This limitation appears particularly with upward counterfactuals, imagining better outcomes. These comparisons generate dissatisfaction with actual results. By not constructing detailed scenarios of how things could have gone better, calm people avoid regret amplification. The actual outcome stands alone without negative comparison. Downward counterfactuals imagine worse outcomes. These can generate relief and gratitude. Calm people engage in downward counterfactuals occasionally, but don't rely on them for emotional regulation. They don't need to imagine catastrophes avoided to feel satisfied. The actual outcome's adequacy stands on its own merit. The limited counterfactual thinking applies to future-oriented scenarios as well. Calm individuals don't extensively imagine multiple potential futures. They consider realistic possibilities for planning purposes, but don't elaborate detailed alternative timelines. This prevents the anxiety that comes from contemplating numerous potential negative futures. Decision-making shows this pattern clearly. After making choices, calm people don't extensively second-guess by imagining outcomes of rejected alternatives. The decision is made, and attention moves to implementation. This prevents decision regret and the paralysis that comes from constantly reconsidering choices. The cognitive style reflects present-focused attention. Resources go toward engaging current reality rather than simulating alternatives. This allocation produces practical engagement rather than hypothetical rumination. The person acts in the present rather than dwelling on alternatives. However, some counterfactual thinking serves useful functions. Learning from mistakes requires imagining how different actions would have produced better results. Calm individuals engage in functional counterfactual analysis for improvement without the emotional elaboration that produces regret. The thinking remains instrumental rather than emotional. The limitation also affects how other situations get evaluated. Calm people don't extensively imagine themselves in other circumstances. This reduces empathic distress, but may also limit empathic understanding. They respond to others' emotions without extensively simulating the experience themselves. Social comparisons involve implicit counterfactuals, imagining the self in others' positions. Limited counterfactual thinking reduces comparison frequency. The person doesn't automatically imagine how their life would differ with other circumstances. This limitation supports the reduced social comparison discussed earlier. Attribution processes connect to counterfactual thinking. Attributing failure to controllable factors implies imagining successful counterfactuals where better actions produced better results. Calm people's attribution patterns involve minimal counterfactual elaboration. They identify causes without extensively imagining alternative action sequences. Memory for past events shows this pattern. Calm individuals recall what happened without extensively adding imagined alternatives to memory. The memory remains factual rather than becoming contaminated with unrealized possibilities. This preserves memory accuracy and prevents emotional distortion. The cognitive limitation appears in creative tasks as well. Generating alternatives requires counterfactual imagination. Calm people may show less creative fluency in brainstorming, but higher implementation success. They focus on developing one good solution rather than generating many alternatives. This thought pattern operates within a broader sensory processing framework that determines how stimuli register at the most fundamental level. Sensory processing sensitivity thresholds. Nervous systems vary in how strongly they respond to sensory input. Sensory processing sensitivity describes this reactivity dimension. Calm individuals typically show moderate to low sensitivity, meaning stimuli must reach higher intensity before producing strong responses. This threshold difference appears across all sensory modalities. Sound must be louder to register as bothersome. Light must be brighter to feel uncomfortable. Touch must be more intense to produce discomfort. Tastes and smells require stronger concentrations to evoke reactions. The nervous system operates with higher activation thresholds. The lower sensitivity provides automatic protection from overstimulation. Environments that overwhelm high-sensitivity individuals remain comfortable for low-sensitivity people. Busy offices, crowded spaces, and noisy settings don't exceed their tolerance thresholds. The person can function in these environments without distress. This sensitivity level appears to have strong genetic components. Twin studies show high heritability for sensory processing traits. Some calm individuals inherit nervous systems that simply don't react strongly to moderate stimulation. This biological foundation supports behavioral calmness. The threshold affects emotional reactivity indirectly. Sensory overwhelm triggers stress responses. By not experiencing sensory overwhelm frequently, calm people avoid this trigger for arousal. Their emotional stability partly reflects reduced sensory burden on the nervous system. Pain threshold correlates with general sensory sensitivity. Low sensitivity individuals tolerate higher pain levels before reporting distress. This pain tolerance extends to emotional pain metaphorically. They tolerate uncomfortable situations longer before becoming distressed. The physical and psychological tolerance may share neural substrates. However, low sensitivity can reduce environmental awareness. Subtle cues that signal problems may not register. A faint smell of smoke, quiet distress sounds from others, or slight environmental changes might not cross the perception threshold. The protective effect of low sensitivity occasionally creates genuine blind spots. Optimal sensitivity likely falls in the moderate range. Extremely low sensitivity produces obtuseness, while extremely high sensitivity produces overwhelm. Calm individuals cluster in the moderate to moderately low range. They notice important stimuli without becoming flooded by routine environmental input. The sensitivity level influences lifestyle choices. Low sensitivity people naturally gravitate toward environments and activities that high sensitivity people find intolerable. They choose urban over rural, active over quiet, complex over simple. These choices match their nervous system characteristics and maintain comfort. Adaptation occurs within individuals' sensitivity ranges. Someone with low sensitivity can become more attuned to subtle stimuli through training. The fundamental threshold remains, but gets calibrated through attention and practice. Professional skills like wine tasting or musical performance develop enhanced discrimination within innate sensitivity constraints. Aging affects sensory processing. Thresholds generally rise with age, meaning older adults require more intense stimulation to register the same perception. This age-related change might contribute to increased calmness in older adults. The nervous system becomes less reactive naturally. Sensory sensitivity interacts with attentional focus. Directing attention to subtle stimuli enhances detection temporarily. Calm people's diffuse attention style means they don't amplify subtle sensations through focused attention. The combination of moderate sensitivity and diffuse attention maintains low arousal. Environmental control serves different purposes across sensitivity levels. High sensitivity individuals need environmental management to prevent overwhelm. Low sensitivity individuals need environmental richness to maintain engagement. Calm people's environmental preferences match their sensitivity profile. This sensory foundation supports behavioral patterns organized around stable priorities that resist constant reprioritization based on momentary pressures. Goal hierarchy and priority stability. Goals organize behavior by directing attention and effort toward valued outcomes. These goals exist in hierarchies from abstract values to concrete actions. Calm individuals maintain stable goal hierarchies that resist disruption from momentary circumstances. Their high-level values remain fixed across situations. Core priorities don't shift based on temporary feelings or external pressures. This stability provides consistent direction regardless of changing conditions. The person knows what matters fundamentally and doesn't question these foundations repeatedly. The stable hierarchy prevents the emotional whiplash that comes from constantly reprioritizing. When priorities shift frequently, goals conflict and create internal tension. Stable priorities eliminate this conflict. Current actions align with enduring values without requiring constant reassessment. Goal conflicts do occur, but get resolved through the established hierarchy. When lower-level goals conflict, the higher-level priority determines resolution. The person doesn't experience paralysis or distress because the decision framework exists. The hierarchy provides clear arbitration between competing options. This stability appears in long-term planning. Calm individuals maintain consistent directions across years. Career paths, relationship investments, and personal development follow coherent trajectories. The consistency reflects underlying goal stability. External opportunities get evaluated against stable criteria rather than shifting preferences. The stable hierarchy also produces predictable behavior. Others can anticipate how the calm person will respond because their priorities don't fluctuate. This predictability builds trust in relationships and reliability in professional contexts. The consistency becomes part of their social identity. However, excessive stability can become rigidity. Changing circumstances sometimes require goal revision. Calm people who cannot adapt their hierarchies to new realities may persist in outdated directions. The stability that usually serves them well can occasionally prevent appropriate adaptation. The hierarchy includes implementation intentions linking abstract goals to concrete actions. These connections remain stable as well. The person knows what specific behaviors serve their values. The implementation pathway doesn't require constant reconstruction. The behavior value link operates automatically. Emotional stability follows from goal stability. Emotions arise from progress toward or away from goals. When goals shift constantly, emotional states fluctuate correspondingly. Stable goals produce stable emotional trajectories. Progress remains measurable against fixed standards rather than moving targets. The stable hierarchy affects motivation sustainability. Long-term goal pursuit requires consistent effort despite obstacles. Stable priorities maintain this effort because the goal's importance doesn't waver. Temporary setbacks don't cause goal abandonment because the underlying value remains firm. Decision fatigue decreases with stable hierarchies. Each decision doesn't require evaluating fundamental priorities. The framework exists and just needs application to specific circumstances. This reduces the cognitive load of daily choices and preserves resources for other demands. Social influence affects goal hierarchies less in calm individuals. Others' opinions and social trends don't easily shift their priorities. This resistance to social pressure maintains autonomy and prevents the distress that comes from living according to others' values. The person pursues their own direction consistently. The hierarchy development reflects life experience and values clarification. Calm people have typically engaged in sufficient self-reflection to establish what matters to them. The clarity emerges from experience rather than constant analysis. Once established, the hierarchy provides stable guidance. This goal stability interacts with all previously discussed mechanisms to create the overall pattern of sustained low arousal across diverse situations and extended time periods. Cognitive load management. Working memory holds limited information simultaneously. When demands exceed this capacity, cognitive overload occurs and produces stress responses. Calm individuals manage cognitive load through strategies that keep processing demands within comfortable ranges. They chunk information into meaningful units rather than processing individual elements separately. This compression increases effective capacity. A phone number becomes 3 chunks rather than 10 digits. Complex problems become organized frameworks rather than disconnected facts. The chunking operates automatically through practiced pattern recognition. Task sequencing prevents simultaneous processing demands. Rather than juggling multiple complex tasks, calm people complete one before starting another. This serial processing maintains load below threshold. Even when managing multiple projects, they partition attention so working memory handles one demanding element at a time. External storage systems extend cognitive capacity. Written lists, calendars, and organized files reduce what must be held in mind. Calm individuals reliably externalize information rather than attempting to remember everything internally. This offloading preserves mental capacity for active processing rather than storage. They terminate completed mental processes rather than leaving them active. Decisions made, problems solved, and tasks finished get mentally closed. The cognitive process ends cleanly rather than running in background loops. This closure prevents accumulated drain from multiple semi-active processes. Information input gets regulated to match processing capacity. Calm people limit incoming information flow when already operating near capacity. They delay reading messages, postpone decisions, or defer new commitments. This input control prevents the cascading overload that occurs when new demands pile onto existing load. The management includes recognizing capacity fluctuations. Processing capacity varies with time of day, fatigue level, and recent demands. Calm individuals adjust their cognitive commitments based on available capacity. They tackle demanding tasks when fresh and handle routine matters when depleted. This matching optimizes performance and prevents overwhelm. Automation reduces load for recurring tasks. Through practice, actions become automatic and require minimal executive resources. Driving, typing, basic social responses. These run efficiently without consuming working memory. The automation frees capacity for novel challenges requiring full attention. Cognitive simplification strategies reduce unnecessary complexity. Calm people often use heuristics and simplified decision rules rather than exhaustive analysis. This pragmatic approach produces adequate decisions without the cognitive burden of optimization. The simplification maintains functioning without overload. However, oversimplification can produce poor decisions. Important choices sometimes require complex analysis. Calm individuals must balance simplification against decision quality. The tendency toward cognitive efficiency can occasionally sacrifice accuracy when thorough processing would yield better outcomes. Load management affects learning capacity. Working memory limitations constrain how much new information can be integrated simultaneously. Calm people typically learn gradually, incorporating new material in manageable increments. This pacing prevents the confusion that comes from information overload during learning. Social interactions create cognitive load through simultaneous demands. Reading others' signals, formulating responses, monitoring conversation flow, and regulating self-presentation all consume capacity. Calm people often prefer smaller social groups where these demands stay manageable. Large gatherings can exceed their preferred load limits. The management style appears in communication patterns. Calm individuals often speak concisely, conveying necessary information without elaboration. This efficiency reflects their cognitive processing style. Lengthy explanations and complex descriptions increase load for both speaker and listener. The conciseness maintains manageable cognitive demands. Multitasking gets avoided or minimized. True simultaneous processing of complex tasks is impossible. Apparent multitasking actually involves rapid switching that increases overall load. Calm people recognize this and focus attention singularly. The unified focus prevents the inefficiency and stress of constant switching. This load management operates alongside specific adaptations to uncertainty that many people find distressing, but calm individuals tolerate easily. Habituation to uncertainty. Uncertainty about outcomes, situations, or information creates discomfort for most people. The ambiguity triggers threat detection systems because unclear situations historically represented danger. Calm individuals have developed tolerance for uncertainty through repeated exposure to ambiguous situations without catastrophic results. This tolerance appears as reduced urge to resolve ambiguity immediately. They can hold questions without rushing to answers. Situations can remain unclear without producing distress. The tolerance allows patience while information accumulates or situations clarify naturally over time. The habituation occurs through recognition that most ambiguous situations resolve acceptably regardless of advanced knowledge. Not knowing what will happen doesn't prevent adequate responses when events unfold. This experiential learning weakens the association between uncertainty and threat. Ambiguity becomes neutral rather than anxiety-provoking. Calm people distinguish between productive and unproductive uncertainty reduction efforts. Some ambiguity can be clarified through reasonable effort. Other uncertainty can't be resolved regardless of effort. They invest in resolvable uncertainty and accept irreducible ambiguity. This discrimination prevents wasted effort on uncontrollable unknowns. The tolerance extends to interpersonal ambiguity. Not knowing what others think or intend doesn't trigger urgent information seeking. The calm person can tolerate unclear social situations while gathering information gradually. This prevents the anxious questioning or reassurance seeking that characterizes relationship anxiety. Decision-making under uncertainty proceeds without paralysis. Calm individuals make reasoned choices despite incomplete information. They accept that perfect information rarely exists and adequate decisions are possible within uncertainty. This acceptance allows action while others remain frozen by unknowns. The habituation creates comfort with open-ended processes. Projects without clear endpoints, relationships without defined trajectories, and situations without predetermined outcomes all become tolerable. The person engages with ongoing ambiguity without requiring premature closure. However, some uncertainty requires attention. Genuine risks need assessment and management. Calm people's tolerance can occasionally produce insufficient vigilance toward real threats. The habituation that usually serves them well might delay appropriate precautionary responses. The tolerance also affects curiosity patterns. Some people find uncertainty stimulating and are driven to explore unknowns. Others find uncertainty threatening and avoid ambiguous situations. Calm individuals typically fall between these extremes. They neither seek nor avoid uncertainty systematically, but engage pragmatically based on context. Professional domains vary in uncertainty levels. Research, creative work, and entrepreneurship involve high inherent ambiguity. Calm people gravitate toward these fields partly because their uncertainty tolerance makes the work less distressing. Their temperament matches the occupational demands. The habituation shows in information-seeking behavior. Calm people don't compulsively check for updates or seek reassurance. They tolerate information gaps until natural opportunities for updates arise. This reduces the behavioral agitation that characterizes intolerance of uncertainty. Teaching children to tolerate uncertainty involves graduated exposure similar to other habituation processes. Parents who allow children to experience manageable ambiguity without rushing to resolve every unknown foster tolerance development. Calm individuals often had these developmental experiences. Uncertainty tolerance correlates with cognitive flexibility. Rigid thinking patterns require clear categories and definite answers. Flexible thinking accommodates ambiguity and provisional conclusions. Calm people's flexibility supports their tolerance by allowing multiple possibilities to coexist mentally without distress. Cultural factors influence uncertainty tolerance significantly. Cultures high in uncertainty avoidance emphasize rules, structure, and predictability. Cultures comfortable with uncertainty accept ambiguity as normal. Calm individuals' tolerance partly reflects their cultural context and partly represents individual differences within cultures. This psychological tolerance for ambiguity complements physical patterns of muscle tension that directly influence emotional experience. Proprioceptive relaxation and muscle tension baselines. Proprioception includes awareness of body position and muscle tension states. These physical sensations feed back into emotional experience through body-mind connections. Calm individuals maintain low baseline muscle tension that supports their psychological calmness. Their resting muscle tone sits in relaxed ranges. Facial muscles remain loose. Jaw stays unclenched. Shoulders rest in neutral position rather than elevated. Hands and arms maintain minimal tension. This physical relaxation occurs automatically without conscious effort. The body defaults to low tension states. The low tension baseline produces multiple effects. Proprioceptive signals to the brain indicate safety rather than threat. When muscles stay relaxed, the nervous system interprets the environment as secure. This bottom-up signal supports psychological calm. The body tells the brain that relaxation is appropriate. Breathing patterns connect to muscle tension. Relaxed breathing involves diaphragmatic movement with minimal accessory muscle involvement. Calm people breathe this way naturally. The breathing pattern both reflects and reinforces low tension. The respiratory muscular system operates in an integrated low arousal mode. The tension baseline affects energy expenditure. Chronic muscle tension consumes energy continuously. Low baseline tension conserves resources. Calm individuals expend less energy maintaining physical states throughout the day. This efficiency contributes to their sustained capacity for engagement. Postural habits reflect underlying tension patterns. Calm people maintain balanced posture without rigid bracing. The body arranges itself efficiently for support without excessive muscular work. This postural ease both results from and contributes to overall relaxation. The low tension shows particularly in facial expression. Neutral facial states remain truly neutral without subtle tension patterns that communicate distress to others. This relaxed face contributes to the calm social signaling discussed earlier. Others perceive and respond to the physical manifestation of internal states. However, some muscle tone is necessary for readiness and health. Complete flexidity would impair function. Calm individuals maintain appropriate tone for activity while avoiding the excess tension that serves no functional purpose. The baseline represents optimization rather than minimization. Physical activity affects tension baselines. Regular movement and stretching prevent tension accumulation. Calm people often include physical practices in their routines. The movement maintains the low baseline by releasing any accumulated tension before it becomes chronic. Manual interventions like massage can temporarily reduce tension but don't permanently alter baselines without ongoing practice. Calm individuals' low baselines develop through consistent patterns rather than occasional interventions. The sustained habit creates the stable characteristic. Pain conditions can override natural tension patterns. Chronic pain often produces protective muscle guarding. Calm individuals with pain conditions may maintain psychological composure despite elevated muscle tension. The tension becomes a response to physical rather than psychological factors. The mind-body connection operates bidirectionally. Just as low tension supports calm psychology produces low tension. The systems reinforce each other continuously. Interventions targeting either system can influence the other. Physical relaxation practices can enhance psychological calm. Psychological calm naturally produces physical relaxation. Sleep quality affects tension baselines. Poor sleep prevents full muscle recovery and leads to elevated daytime tension. Calm individuals typically maintain sleep practices that allow complete physical recovery. The restorative sleep supports low tension baselines. Age affects muscle tension patterns. Younger individuals may maintain low tension through natural flexibility. Older adults may require more deliberate practice to prevent tension accumulation. Calm older adults often adapt their physical practices to maintain the relaxation that came naturally when younger. This physical foundation interacts with psychological narratives about identity that either stabilize or destabilize emotional experience. Narrative identity coherence. People construct narratives about themselves that organize past experiences and future directions into coherent stories. These identity narratives significantly affect emotional stability. Calm individuals maintain consistent self-narratives that prevent identity-based anxiety and confusion. Their life stories show continuity across time. Past, present, and future connect logically. Current identity makes sense given personal history. Future directions extend naturally from established identity. This temporal coherence prevents the disorientation that comes from fragmented self-understanding. The narrative includes integrated contradictions. Everyone contains multiple aspects that might seem inconsistent. Calm individuals weave these elements into unified stories rather than experiencing them as contradictions. The complexity gets incorporated as natural human variation rather than creating internal conflict. Core identity elements remain stable while allowing peripheral growth. Fundamental self-conceptions don't shift radically. The person knows who they are at a basic level. This stability provides psychological anchor points while permitting development in specific domains. The coherent narrative affects decision-making. Choices align with established identity. Opportunities get evaluated against self-understanding. This alignment produces consistent life direction and prevents the scattered pursuit of incompatible goals. The person's path makes sense within their narrative framework. Relationship patterns reflect identity coherence. Calm individuals seek relationships compatible with their self-conception. They don't radically reinvent themselves for different relationships. This consistency allows authentic connection and prevents the exhaustion of maintaining incompatible identities across different relationships. The narrative accommodates past mistakes without fragmentation. Errors and failures get incorporated as growth experiences rather than threatening core identity. The person remains fundamentally themselves despite having made poor choices. This integration prevents shame spirals that would require defensive identity revision. Trauma can disrupt narrative coherence. Experiences that contradict core beliefs about self or world create narrative ruptures. Calm individuals typically have either avoided severe trauma or successfully integrated traumatic experiences into revised but still coherent narratives. The integration work preserves identity stability. Cultural and familial narratives influence personal identity construction. Calm people's stories often align with or deliberately contrast against these broader narratives. Either alignment or conscious differentiation can produce coherence. Unexamined mixture of adopted and rejected elements creates incoherence. The narrative affects memory. People remember experiences that fit their identity stories more readily than contradictory experiences. Calm individuals' memories reinforce their calm identity. They recall instances of successful composure more than moments of distress. This memory bias strengthens identity coherence. Social mirroring either confirms or challenges identity narratives. When others respond to someone consistently with their self-conception, the narrative gets reinforced. When others see them differently, cognitive dissonance arises. Calm people typically elicit responses that confirm their calm identity. The social feedback loop maintains narrative stability. Identity development involves narrative revision. Adolescence and young adulthood require constructing coherent adult identities. Calm individuals typically complete this developmental work successfully. Their narratives reach stable forms that don't require constant reconstruction. The developmental achievement provides ongoing stability. However, rigid narratives can prevent adaptive change. Circumstances sometimes require identity revision. Calm people whose narratives are too fixed may struggle to adapt to major life transitions. The coherence that usually supports stability can occasionally become a constraint against necessary growth. This narrative coherence represents one element within broader patterns that accumulate and strengthen across the lifespan. Long-term pattern integration. Calmness becomes increasingly stable across time through multiple reinforcing mechanisms. Decades of consistent patterns create deeply embedded systems that resist disruption. The integration of biological, psychological, and social factors produces robust stability. Neural pathways strengthen through repeated use. The brain structures supporting calm responses become more efficient and automatic. Decades of practicing these patterns create neural configurations optimized for low arousal functioning. The neurological foundation becomes increasingly solid with age and experience. Learned associations accumulate. Thousands of experiences link calmness with positive outcomes and arousal with negative ones. This extensive conditioning history means the calm response activates automatically across diverse situations. The person doesn't choose calmness deliberately. The conditioned response simply occurs. Identity consolidation locks in behavioral patterns. By middle adulthood, calm individuals fully identify as calm people. This identity commitment maintains patterns through self-consistency motivation. Behavior aligns with identity automatically. The person acts calmly because that's who they are. Social roles stabilize around calm characteristics. Professional positions, relationship dynamics, and community roles all reflect and reinforce calmness. The person occupies life positions suited to their temperament. These roles channel behavior in calm directions and provide ongoing environmental support for the pattern. Physiological systems reach optimized states. The HPA axis, autonomic nervous system, and other biological systems achieve efficient configurations through decades of stable operation. These systems resist temporary perturbations and return to optimal functioning automatically. The biological foundation becomes self-maintaining. Environmental selection reinforces patterns. Calm individuals have gradually constructed life circumstances that support calmness. Living situations, work environments, social circles, and daily routines all match their temperament. The environment requires less regulatory effort because it's been shaped to fit their characteristics. Skill accumulation supports pattern maintenance. Decades of practice have refined regulation strategies to expert levels. The person has extensive repertoires of effective responses to various challenges. This competence makes calmness easier to maintain because effective tools exist for any situation. Habituation breadth expands continuously. Life experience exposes people to increasingly diverse situations. Each novel situation gets habituated through experience. Over decades, the range of habituated situations becomes comprehensive. Fewer and fewer circumstances remain capable of producing strong reactions. Relationship stability contributes to overall stability. Long-term partnerships, enduring friendships, and established family roles provide consistent social environments. These stable relationships both reflect and support calm functioning. The social world becomes predictable and supportive through long-term relationship maintenance. Health accumulation or deterioration affects patterns. Sustained low stress contributes to better physical health. Good health supports continued psychological well-being. This creates positive feedback where calmness protects health and health enables calmness. However, age-related health problems can disrupt even well-established calm patterns. Wisdom development enhances calmness. Accumulated life experience provides perspective on temporary difficulties. Calm older adults recognize patterns and anticipate resolutions based on extensive prior experience. This wisdom-based perspective maintains calm during situations that would distress less experienced individuals. Economic and social stability also matters. Financial security and social standing reduce stress exposure. Calm individuals often achieve stable positions through decades of steady functioning. The security their calmness helped create then supports continued calmness. Generativity concerns emerge in later adulthood. Focus shifts toward contributing to others and leaving legacies. This outward orientation reduces self-focused distress. Calm older adults often find satisfaction in mentoring, teaching, or supporting younger generations. The generative focus maintains positive emotional states. The integrated pattern becomes resistant to disruption, but not invulnerable. Major traumas, significant losses, or severe stressors can challenge even highly established calm patterns. Most calm individuals maintain their characteristic responses through normal life stressors, but show temporary dysregulation under extreme conditions. Recovery from disruptions occurs more readily in individuals with long-established patterns. The decades of calm functioning create strong attractors, pulling the system back toward baseline. Temporary elevations in arousal feel foreign and uncomfortable. The person actively works to restore their normal state because deviation feels wrong. The long-term integration represents the culmination of all mechanisms operating consistently across the lifespan. Each element discussed throughout this exploration contributes to the overall pattern. Together, they create a stable configuration that characterizes the individual's fundamental approach to emotional experience and behavioral response. The pattern becomes the person's nature through sustained reinforcement and deep integration across biological, psychological, and social domains. This is where our journey ends. Consider subscribing if you found this an interesting watch. Sleep well and good night.